On a quiet spring night in Ohio, while most of the city slept, a single camera blinked silently above a college town street. It was not watching for history. It was not recording destiny. It was simply doing what it had been installed to do. Observe. Record. Forget. But years later, that grainy footage would become the most haunting witness in a case that refused to stay buried. A case where a young woman walked into the night and never walked back. Her name was Emily Hartwell. She was 21 years old. A junior at a small Ohio university. Known by her friends as thoughtful, soft-spoken, and quietly determined. She wasn't the loudest person in the room. She didn't demand attention. She earned it slowly, the way people do when they listen more than they speak. Professors remembered her because she always stayed after class, asking careful questions. Friends remembered her because she checked in, because she noticed when someone wasn't okay. Emily didn't have enemies. She didn't have a dangerous lifestyle. She didn't disappear into drugs, crime, or chaos. She lived a life that looked ordinary from the outside. And that's what made her disappearance so terrifying. Because if someone like Emily Hartwell could vanish without a trace, then no one was safe. She grew up in a quiet suburb outside Columbus. Her parents, Mark and Susan Hartwell, raised her and her younger brother in a modest two-story home with creaking stairs and a backyard maple tree that Emily used to climb when she was a child. She was a reader. A journal keeper. The kind of kid who underlined sentences in books because words mattered to her. When she left for college in the fall of 2003, her mother cried quietly in the driveway after the car disappeared down the street. Not because she feared something bad would happen, but because she knew life was changing. None of them imagined how permanent that change would be. By 2006, Emily had settled into campus life. She lived off campus in a shared townhouse just 6 blocks from the university. The neighborhood was filled with students, porch lights, parked cars, and the constant low hum of safety that comes from familiarity. People walked at night. People trusted the streets. Emily worked part-time at the campus library. She volunteered twice a month at a local literacy program. On weekends, she sometimes joined friends at a coffee shop or a quiet bar near campus. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't careless. The night she disappeared began like any other. Friday, April 14, 2006. Emily finished her shift at the library just after 8:30 p.m. She logged out of the computer system, said goodbye to her supervisor, and walked outside into the cooling spring air. The sky was clear. The sidewalks were busy with students heading out for the night. At 9:07 p.m., she sent a text message to her roommate. Just one line. Heading home. Be there soon. She never arrived. At first, no one panicked. Her roommate assumed she had stopped to talk to someone. Maybe she ran into a classmate. Maybe she decided to grab food. By midnight, concern began to creep in. Emily wasn't answering calls. Her phone went straight to voicemail. By morning, fear had taken over. Her bed hadn't been slept in. Her keys weren't on the counter. Her wallet wasn't in her room. The clothes she had worn the night before were the same clothes missing from her closet. Emily Hartwell had vanished somewhere between the campus library and her front door. The police were notified at 9:42 a.m. Saturday morning. Officers arrived, took statements, and initially treated it as a possible voluntary absence. She was an adult. There were no signs of struggle. No blood. No witnesses reporting screams. But her parents knew something was wrong. Susan Hartwell flew to Ohio that same afternoon. Mark followed the next day. They stood in Emily's empty bedroom, surrounded by posters, notebooks, and a half-finished term paper on her desk. Susan sat on the bed and held Emily's pillow to her chest, whispering her daughter's name like it could summon her back. The search began quickly. Campus police canvassed the area. Volunteers printed flyers. Friends retraced Emily's usual walking routes. Every streetlight, every alley, every doorway between the library and the townhouse became a point of focus. Then, 3 days later, someone remembered the cameras. The city had recently installed a network of CCTV cameras along major pedestrian routes near campus. They were meant to deter vandalism and theft. No one had ever imagined they would be used to track a missing person. Investigators pulled footage from the night Emily disappeared. Hours of it. Most of it useless. Students passing. Cars driving. Nothing unusual. Until 9:19 p.m. There she was. Emily Hartwell appeared on camera walking alone down Maple Street. She wore a light jacket, jeans, and carried her shoulder bag. Her pace was normal. Not hurried. Not distracted. She glanced briefly at her phone, then tucked it away. She looked safe. 9 seconds later, the footage showed something else. A dark-colored sedan passed slowly behind her. The car did not stop. At 9:20 p.m., Emily turned the corner onto Oak Lane. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Oak Lane had no cameras. That gap, just 3 blocks long, became the most terrifying stretch of road in Ohio. Police expanded the search radius. K-9 units were brought in. Dogs tracked Emily's scent from the camera corner, then lost it near a small parking lot behind a closed grocery store. There were no signs of a struggle. No dropped belongings. Nothing. Days turned into weeks. Media attention grew. Emily's face appeared on evening news broadcasts. Her parents stood in front of microphones, pleading for information. Susan's voice shook every time she spoke. Mark clenched his fists, fighting the urge to scream. Then came the tips. Hundreds of them. A woman thought she saw Emily at a bus station. A man claimed she got into a car willingly. Someone else said they heard an argument near Oak Lane that night. Each lead raised hope. Each lead collapsed into nothing. Emily's phone was never turned on again. Her bank account was untouched. Her email went silent. By June, the case had grown cold. But one detective refused to let it go. Detective Alan Reeves had worked missing persons cases for 15 years. He knew patterns. He knew statistics. He knew that time was the enemy. But something about Emily's case unsettled him. There was no chaos. No mistakes. No obvious crime. And that scared him more than blood ever could. Reeves went back to the footage. Again. And again. Frame by frame. He watched Emily walk. He watched the passing car. He noticed something that others had dismissed. The sedan slowed. Not much. But enough. Enough to suggest attention. Enough to suggest awareness. Reeves requested additional footage from nearby traffic cameras. Cameras never intended to watch sidewalks. Cameras meant for intersections. At 9:21 p.m., a traffic camera 2 blocks away captured a dark sedan making a slow turn onto Oak Lane. The image was poor. But the timing was exact. For the first time, investigators believed Emily had not simply vanished. They believed she had been taken. Quietly. Efficiently. Without a scream. Without a witness. Without a trace. And whoever did it knew exactly where the cameras ended. By the end of summer, flyers began to fade from lampposts. Students graduated. New ones arrived, unaware of the name Emily Hartwell. Life moved forward. But somewhere, in a locked evidence room, a hard drive labeled April 14, 2006 Saturday untouched. Waiting. Because years later, technology would evolve. And that footage would speak again. The first mistake investigators made was assuming that time was on their side. In the days after Emily Hartwell vanished, police believed answers would surface quickly. A witness would come forward. A vehicle would be identified. A slip would be made. That confidence quietly shaped every early decision. Leads were triaged. Some were delayed. Others were dismissed entirely. Detective Alan Reeves felt that tension immediately. He watched how the case was handled, how resources were allocated, how urgency faded just slightly with each passing week. He knew that disappearances without chaos were the hardest to solve. There was no crime scene screaming for attention. No obvious villain to chase. Just absence. Reeves began by reconstructing Emily's final week in painstaking detail. He interviewed professors, co-workers, classmates, friends, her roommate, anyone who had spoken to Emily in the days before April 14th. He listened not just to what they said, but how they said it. Hesitations. Tone shifts. The unspoken gaps. Emily had been stressed, but not unusually so. Finals were approaching. She had been considering graduate school. She'd recently applied for a summer internship out of state. Nothing suggested she was planning to disappear. Nothing suggested she was afraid. One comment stood out. A classmate mentioned that Emily had complained about someone watching her a few weeks earlier. The remark had been casual. Almost dismissive. At the time, it sounded like paranoia. College towns were full of strangers. But Reeves circled it in his notebook. When pressed, the classmate recalled Emily saying she'd noticed the same car near her townhouse more than once. A dark sedan. She hadn't memorized the plate. She hadn't reported it. She'd laughed it off. Reeves felt a chill. The sedan. The same type of car seen on CCTV the night she vanished. Police ran registration checks for similar vehicles in the area. Hundreds matched. Nothing concrete. No plate. No clear make or model. Just a shape. A shadow. Meanwhile, Emily's phone records arrived. Her last outgoing text was to her roommate at 9:07 p.m. No incoming calls afterward. No pings beyond campus towers. Her phone didn't move after that moment. It didn't travel. It didn't activate again. That detail bothered Reeves deeply. Most abductors made mistakes. Phones rang. Messages were sent. Towers were hit. But Emily's phone simply went silent, as if powered down intentionally. That suggested planning. Someone who understood technology. Someone who knew what to eliminate. Reeves next turned his attention to Oak Lane. During daylight, the street looked harmless. Narrow. Residential. Trees lining the sidewalks. At night, it became something else entirely. Shadows pooled between parked cars. Porch lights were inconsistent. Several houses were rentals, occupied by students who came and went. Officers knocked on every door. Most residents remembered nothing. A few recalled hearing a car that night. One neighbor mentioned seeing headlights stop briefly near the grocery store parking lot. Another remembered a woman walking alone earlier in the evening, but couldn't say if it was Emily. No one heard a scream. That absence haunted the investigation. Because screams meant resistance. And resistance meant witnesses. Whatever happened to Emily Hartwell happened quickly. Quietly. Reeves requested help from the FBI. The request was approved under the condition that no evidence of interstate movement existed yet. Profilers reviewed the case. Their assessment was unsettling. They believed Emily had been targeted. Not randomly. Not opportunistically. Targeted. The profiler suggested the abductor likely observed Emily's routine over time. Knew her schedule. Knew her route. Knew where cameras were positioned, or at least where they were not. Someone patient. Someone local. Someone who blended in. That conclusion shifted the investigation inward. Police began examining people within Emily's orbit. Ex-boyfriends. Classmates. Co-workers. Tutors. Neighbors. Emily had dated briefly the year before. The relationship ended amicably. The man had an alibi. He was cleared. A co-worker expressed intense concern, bordering on obsession. He was questioned twice. His computer was searched. Nothing connected him to the disappearance. Reeves felt the case tightening and loosening at the same time. Every suspect dissolved under scrutiny. Every theory collapsed. Then, 6 months after Emily vanished, something unexpected happened. A woman called the tip line. She claimed she saw Emily. The woman said she worked at a rest stop off Interstate 71. Late April. Just days after the disappearance. She remembered the girl because she looked lost. Nervous. She was with a man who answered questions for her. The man became aggressive when the woman tried to speak directly to Emily. The tip electrified the task force. Sketch artists were brought in. The woman described the man as mid-30s. Clean cut. Unremarkable. Brown hair. No accent. The kind of face that disappeared into crowds. Police reviewed traffic footage from the rest stop. Nothing usable. No confirmation. The tip couldn't be verified. But it changed something important. For the first time, Emily was imagined alive after April 14th. And that possibility tore her family apart. Susan Hartwell clung to hope. She replayed the tip again and again, convinced her daughter was out there waiting to be found. Mark Hartwell reacted differently. He grew angrier. More withdrawn. He demanded answers. Demanded action. Demanded results that no one could deliver. The strain fractured their marriage. Emily's disappearance didn't just remove a person. It hollowed out everything around her. As months turned into years, the investigation slowed. Funding was reduced. Officers reassigned. Reeves remained, quietly preserving evidence. He archived everything. Footage. Reports. Tips. He labeled boxes meticulously, convinced the case wasn't finished. Just sleeping. In 2012, 6 years after Emily vanished, technology finally caught up. The department upgraded its video enhancement software. Old cases were reprocessed. Reeves submitted Emily's CCTV footage once more. This time, something changed. The software sharpened motion patterns. Stabilized frames. Extracted light data from reflections no one had noticed before. In one enhanced frame, just before the sedan turned onto Oak Lane, a partial reflection appeared in a storefront window. A license plate. Not complete. But enough. 3 characters. Reeves stared at the screen for a long time. Because for the first time since 2006, the case had direction. And somewhere in Ohio, A man who believed he had gotten away with the perfect crime had no idea that the camera he ignored was about to remember him. The partial license plate changed the energy inside the room. 4 years, Emily Hartwell's disappearance had lived in theory and speculation. Profiles. Possibilities. What ifs? But a license plate, even an incomplete one, belonged to the real world. It belonged to paperwork. Databases. Names. Addresses. Histories. Detective Reeves knew better than to celebrate too early. Partial plates were dangerous. They could mislead as easily as they could guide. But they were something tangible, and after 6 years of nothing, something mattered. The 3 characters were run through the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles database, filtered by vehicle type, color range, and registration proximity to the university. The first search returned over 400 results. Reeves narrowed it further, cross-referencing vehicles registered within a 10-mile radius of Oak Lane in 2006. The list shrank to 37. Then to 12. Then to 4. 4 vehicles that matched the partial plate, the body shape, and the general size seen in the footage. Reeves stared at the names. One of them stopped him cold. The owner lived less than a mile from Emily's townhouse in 2006. His name was Daniel Kessler. Kessler was 32 at the time Emily vanished. Employed as a freelance IT consultant. No criminal record. No traffic violations. No visible red flags. He lived alone. Paid his bills. Filed his taxes. Voted occasionally. The kind of man police often overlooked because nothing about him demanded attention. Reeves pulled Kessler's address history. In 2006, Kessler lived on Pinecrest Drive, a quiet street that connected directly to Oak Lane through a series of back roads. Roads with no traffic cameras. Roads a local would know instinctively. Reeves requested Kessler's employment records. They revealed something unsettling. Kessler frequently worked late nights. Remote contracts. On-call support. No fixed schedule. No co-workers to verify his whereabouts on the night Emily disappeared. Still, suspicion was not evidence. Reeves needed more. He reviewed old tips again, this time with Kessler's name in mind. One tip stood out. It had been dismissed years earlier. A student had reported seeing a man near the grocery store parking lot several times in the weeks before Emily vanished. The man sat in a dark sedan, engine running, watching people enter and leave. The student assumed he was waiting for someone. The description matched Kessler. The sedan matched Kessler's car. Reeves felt the case tightening around him. But tightening wasn't enough. He needed confirmation. In 2013, Reeves petitioned for a warrant to review Kessler's old electronic devices. Laptops. External drives. Phones. The request was denied. Too much time had passed. No probable cause strong enough to justify intrusion. Reeves wasn't surprised. Instead, he waited. And watched. Over the next 2 years, Reeves quietly tracked Kessler's life. Employment changes. Address updates. Vehicle registrations. Everything remained painfully ordinary. Until it didn't. In 2015, Kessler was arrested in a neighboring county for a minor charge, unlawful surveillance. He had been caught installing a hidden camera in a shared apartment laundry room. The charge was reduced. A fine paid. No jail time. The case barely made local news. But to Reeves, it was a crack in the mask. Unlawful surveillance wasn't violent. It wasn't kidnapping. But it was about control. Observation. Watching without being seen. Reeves reopened his request. This time, the warrant was granted. Digital forensic analysts examined Kessler's devices. Years of data were gone. Drives wiped. Phones reset. But forensic recovery is not about what remains. It's about what was removed. They found fragments. Search histories recovered from unallocated space. Late-night queries from 2006. How to disable phone tracking. CCTV blind spots. College town crime investigations. One recovered file froze the room. A folder name. EH_backup. Inside it, corrupted but readable metadata from deleted images. The files themselves were gone, but timestamps remained. Dates aligned with April 2006. Locations tagged near Oak Lane. Reeves felt his pulse rise. The initials. Emily Hartwell. Investigators moved quickly now. Kessler was brought in for questioning. He was calm. Polite. Cooperative. He denied knowing Emily. Denied ever seeing her. Denied owning a camera in 2006, despite evidence suggesting otherwise. When asked about the folder, He said the initials were coincidental. Reeves watched him closely. No sweating. No shaking. No anger. Just practiced neutrality. Then Reeves changed tactics. He asked about the car. Kessler hesitated. Barely a second. But it was there. He said he couldn't remember where he was the night Emily disappeared. Said he might have been working. Might have been home. Might have gone out for groceries. Reeves ended the interview. Not because he had enough. But because he knew Kessler had felt it. The pressure. The sense that something buried was rising. That night, Reeves couldn't sleep. He replayed the interview again and again. The hesitation. The way Kessler avoided specifics. The way his eyes shifted when Emily's name was spoken aloud. Reeves understood something important then. This wasn't a crime of panic. This was a crime of patience. And patient criminals didn't confess easily. Weeks later, a breakthrough arrived from an unexpected place. A retired highway patrol officer contacted the task force. He had seen a news segment about the reopened case. The enhanced footage. The partial plate. He remembered something. In April 2006, he had stopped a dark sedan near Interstate 71 late at night for a broken taillight. The driver was nervous. Overly polite. The passenger seat contained a blanket and duct tape. The officer assumed the driver was moving supplies. He issued a warning and let him go. The date matched. The location matched. The description matched Daniel Kessler. And suddenly, the silence around Emily Hartwell's disappearance began to crack. The traffic stop changed everything. For nearly a decade, Emily Hartwell's disappearance had floated in abstraction. Now it had a time, a place, and a uniformed witness who remembered the unease he felt but couldn't explain back then. The retired officer, Thomas Wilkes, sat in the interview room gripping a paper cup of water with both hands. His voice carried the weight of regret. He remembered the man clearly because something about him felt wrong. Not aggressive. Not drunk. Just controlled. Too controlled. The kind of calm that made small details stand out. The way he answered questions before they were fully asked. The way his eyes kept flicking to the passenger seat. Wilkes described the contents again. A gray moving blanket, folded but bulky. A roll of duct tape. A box cutter resting openly in the center console. Reeves asked the question that had haunted Wilkes for years. Why didn't you search the vehicle? Wilkes exhaled slowly. Because I didn't have cause. And because he looked like every other guy driving home from nowhere. That sentence echoed through the room. Driving home from nowhere. The stop occurred 4 to 5 minutes after Emily's phone went silent. The location placed Kessler on a direct route away from Oak Lane. And the direction of travel was not toward his apartment. It was toward the outskirts of the city. For the first time, Reeves felt the case cross a threshold. This wasn't circumstantial anymore. This was narrative. Investigators mapped Kessler's possible routes that night, overlaying cell tower data, traffic flow, and patrol logs from 2006. One route stood out. It led to a rural industrial corridor dotted with abandoned warehouses, disused rail spurs, and stretches of unlit road. Places people didn't go unless they knew exactly where they were going. Reeves requested a search warrant for Kessler's former vehicle. It took 3 attempts. The 4th was approved. The car no longer existed. Kessler had sold it in 2009. The new owner had scrapped it 2 years later. But vehicles leave echoes. Maintenance records. Salvage yard logs. Photographs taken for listings. One image stopped the forensic analyst cold. The trunk lining. It had been replaced. Not repaired. Replaced entirely. The receipt listed the reason as water damage. But no flood had been recorded in Kessler's area during that period. And water damage didn't explain why the original lining was discarded rather than cleaned. Reeves felt the walls closing in. They brought Kessler in again. This time, the tone was different. No open-ended questions. No hypotheticals. Just facts. They told him about the traffic stop. They told him about the trunk replacement. They told him about the recovered search fragments. Kessler listened without interrupting. When Reeves mentioned the blanket, Kessler's jaw tightened. Just slightly. Reeves leaned forward. Daniel, people don't remember what they were doing on a random Tuesday night. But they remember moments that changed their lives. April 14, 2006 changed someone's life forever. Kessler looked at the table. I didn't hurt anyone, he said quietly. It wasn't a confession. But it wasn't a denial either. The interview ended without an arrest. Reeves hated that. But pressure doesn't always work immediately. Sometimes it works sideways. 2 weeks later, Kessler made a mistake. He changed his routine. Neighbors noticed he stopped leaving his apartment after dark. He began shredding trash. He requested a copy of his own police interview transcript through his attorney. People who had nothing to hide didn't do those things. Reeves pushed again. Ground-penetrating radar was approved for several locations along the industrial corridor. It was a long shot. The land had changed. Construction. Erosion. Time erased things efficiently. The first scans showed nothing. The second site was worse. The third was abandoned before completion. Then, at the fourth location, the radar showed an anomaly. A disturbance inconsistent with natural soil layering. Roughly 6 feet long. Buried deep. Reeves stood at the edge of the site as excavation began. Every scoop of earth felt heavier than the last. At 3 feet, they found debris. Rusted metal. Old trash. At 5 feet, they found fabric. Gray. Moving blanket material. The dig stopped. For a long moment, no one spoke. Forensic teams took over. The remains were fragmentary. Time had taken much. But enough remained. Dental records confirmed it. Emily Hartwell. The news hit the department like a shockwave. For some, it was relief. For others, grief. For Reeves, it was both. They arrested Kessler the next morning. This time, he didn't resist. In the interrogation room, the calm finally fractured. Reeves placed a single photograph on the table. The excavation site. Kessler stared at it for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. "I didn't mean for it to go that far," he whispered. The words fell into the room like broken glass. Reeves said nothing. Kessler began talking. Not all at once. In pieces. He said he had noticed Emily weeks before. Said she was polite. Friendly. Predictable. He said he offered her a ride because it was raining. He said she hesitated. He said she got in anyway. He said she screamed when she realized they weren't going to the grocery store. He said he panicked. He said he didn't know how to stop once it started. Reeves listened. Because this wasn't about rage. This was about entitlement. Control. A man who believed silence was something he could manufacture. When Kessler finished, Reeves stood and left the room. The door closed softly behind him. For the first time in nearly 20 years, Emily Hartwell's voice had been heard. The courtroom was silent when Daniel Kessler entered. No outburst. No defiance. Just a man who looked smaller than the legend that had grown around his name. Cameras clicked softly as he took his seat, hands folded, eyes forward. For nearly 2 decades, Emily Hartwell had been a photograph on a flyer. A face frozen in time. Now her absence filled the room more loudly than any voice. The prosecution did not rush. They began with Emily. They spoke about her childhood, her love for photography, the way she called her mother every Sunday night without fail. They described her last day in ordinary detail, because ordinary lives deserve to be remembered that way. A grocery list. A voicemail left half-finished. A dorm room with the lights still on. Then they began building the timeline. Cell tower data. Traffic camera stills. The retired officer's testimony. The replaced trunk lining. The gray blanket. The excavation site. Each piece was placed gently, deliberately, until the picture became impossible to ignore. When they played the audio of Kessler's confession, the room seemed to shrink. Not because of what he said, but because of how casually he said it. He described panic the way someone might describe spilling a drink. He spoke about control as if it was something that had slipped from his hands rather than something he had taken deliberately. There was no rage in his voice. No remorse that reached beyond himself. The jury watched without expression. Emily's parents did not. Her mother stared straight ahead, unmoving, hands clenched in her lap. Her father bowed his head, shoulders shaking silently. They had waited 18 years to know where their daughter was. They had not waited 18 years to hear how she died. The defense tried to fracture the narrative. They questioned the age of the evidence. The reliability of memory. The absence of eyewitnesses. They suggested contamination. Coincidence. Reasonable doubt. But doubt doesn't survive patterns. And this case was nothing but patterns. When it came time for victim impact statements, Emily's younger brother stood. He had been 9 when she vanished. He was 27 now. "I grew up with an empty chair at every holiday," he said. "I learned how to grieve before I learned how to drive. And every year, I wondered if my sister was cold. Or scared. Or alone." He looked directly at Kessler. "You took her voice," he said. "But you didn't erase her." Kessler did not look back. The verdict came after 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. No one cheered. Justice, when it comes this late, arrives quietly. At sentencing, the judge spoke plainly. This was not an accident, she said. This was a decision. And it was followed by 18 years of silence. Kessler was sentenced to life without parole. As he was led away, he finally looked toward Emily's family. For a moment, it seemed like he might speak. He didn't. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Emily's mother if justice had been served. She paused. "Justice doesn't bring my daughter back," she said. "But it lets her come home." Emily Hartwell was laid to rest 3 weeks later. Not in secrecy, but in sunlight. Students from her old campus attended. Friends who had never stopped hoping stood beside those who had learned how to live with not knowing. Her photograph was placed at the front, no longer a symbol of disappearance, but of remembrance. Detective Reeves attended quietly, standing at the back. He left before the service ended. Some stories, he knew, didn't belong to the people who solved them. They belonged to the people who lived them. In the months that followed, the case changed procedures statewide. Cold case protocols were updated. Digital search histories became standard review. Traffic stops once dismissed as routine were reconsidered as potential turning points. Emily's case became a lesson. Not about fear, but about attention. About how evil doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it waits for silence. And sometimes, decades later, that silence finally breaks. Because every mystery leaves behind a voice. And when someone listens long enough, that voice is eventually heard. Years passed, but Emily Hartwell's name did not fade. It became something else. Not just a headline. Not just a solved case. But a reference point. Law schools studied it. Investigative units cited it. Families of the missing mentioned it in support groups as proof that time did not erase truth. That silence was not the same as innocence. That answers could still be found, even when hope felt exhausted. Emily's parents sold the house they had lived in for 30 years. Too many memories lived there. Too many Sundays waiting for a phone call that never came. They moved closer to the coast, somewhere quieter, somewhere the sound of waves softened the edges of grief. On their living room wall hung one framed photograph. Emily, smiling, hair caught mid-laugh. Not the image used on posters. Not the face associated with fear. Just Emily. Once a year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, her mother wrote a letter. Not to the police. Not to the courts. To Emily. She wrote about the weather. About small victories. About how the world kept moving even when part of her remained still. She never asked questions anymore. She simply told her daughter she was loved. Detective Reeves retired 2 years after the trial. On his last day, he cleared his desk slowly. He placed Emily's case file inside a box marked closed and taped it shut himself. Not because procedure required it. Because he needed to. Before leaving, he stood alone in the evidence room for a long moment. He later said that was when the weight finally lifted. Not because the case was over, but because it had been honored. Daniel Kessler died in prison 8 years into his sentence. There was no public notice. No media coverage. Just a brief entry in a state report. The man who took so much space from the world left it quietly. Emily remained. Her name was added to a scholarship fund for students studying criminal justice. Her story became part of training modules for campus safety and cold case review. Her case forced departments to rethink assumptions, to look twice, to listen longer. Her voice continued, not as an echo of tragedy, but as a warning and a guide. The Ohio case changed how disappearances were investigated. But more importantly, it changed how they were remembered. Not as unsolvable puzzles, but as unfinished conversations. Because cold cases are not cold. They are waiting. Waiting for technology to catch up. Waiting for someone to notice a detail everyone else missed. Waiting for a truth strong enough to survive time. And sometimes, waiting for someone to care long enough to keep asking. Emily Hartwell disappeared in 2006. But she was never erased. Her story reminds us that justice is not always fast. That answers do not arrive on schedule. And that closure does not mean forgetting. It means understanding. It means naming what happened. And it means refusing to let silence have the final word. Because every mystery leaves behind a voice. And when someone listens, even after decades, that voice can still be heard.